Good morning, good afternoon, and good day, good evening for everyone who is watching on this virtual space. Thank you for those who are in the space. Thank you who are watching a recording of us. My name is Christian Rafael Suero, and today I hope you're in the right space. You should be here if you want to learn more about becoming empowered in a virtual landscape, i.e. this space, i.e. interviews, i.e. the placement exchange. If you're not here for that, please feel free to leave the space or stay, whichever one makes the most sense to you. Nick, I'll let my colleague introduce himself while I set up the sharing screens of everything.
Yeah, good morning, good evening, good day, all of those good things for everybody, whatever time zone or location you're in. My name is Nick Bates. I serve as an assistant director for Thurman Center Networks and the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground at Boston University. And also a co-chair here with Christian on our candidate work group here with the TPE committee.
Yes, it's been an amazing ride, an amazing journey. And so we're excited to have y'all in this space to just learn more about how to feel, I don't want to use the word empower repeatedly, but I'm gonna feel confident in this space, right? We know for the last year or so, it's going to be a year in March that we've been navigating COVID. And for those who have not begun their job search process, and for even those who have, it feels a little uncertain about how do I showcase myself in a virtual landscape. And we're hoping that the tools and resources we provide in this session can help you in that experience. And so just to give you like an outline of what we'll do in the space today. There are ultimately three buckets. The first one is setting the stage. So of course you'll hear the learning outcomes. We're going to do a quick empowerment activity. So what does empowerment mean to you and when have you felt empowered? And then we're going to talk about what do you need to feel empowered during this virtual experience, may that be interviews or may even be work sometimes. But then also addressing something I think that underlines us all, which is imposter syndrome. So the idea that you do not deserve what is meant for you or to even apply for opportunities. Then we're going to go into what I love, which is deliverables. And so we're going to make sure that you walk away in this space from tips about resumes and cover letters, and then also tips about the interview process. So how to set your stage for success, what to do after the interviews. And then even when you're thinking about when you do get your opportunity or in that moment of transition or even limbo, how to prepare yourself for your onboarding experience. So it wouldn't be higher education student affairs without a presentation sometimes with learning outcomes. And so just in this space, we're going to define what empowerment means for you as an individual. We're also going to reflect and thinking about what spaces you have felt empowered in. We're also going to examine and review samples of resumes and cover letters that can help inform you and your individual work. And then lastly, we're going to review opportunities, as I just shared, about how to maximize your onboarding experience. Ooh, empowered. So for those who are with us in this space today, I would love for you to use the chat feature and answer this first question, which is, when you hear the word empowerment, what comes to mind? And you can write it to everyone, you can write it to just me. Take about a minute to think about when you hear the word empowerment, what comes to mind? Confidence. Self-care. Support from strength-oriented lens. Motivation to pursue a passion, yes. The feeling to act, yes. Feeling supported to go after something that you want, yes, yes, yes. It's a cross between motivation and encouragement, yes. And if you're still thinking, feel free to type it in the chat. But yes, empowerment is all those things. It's a feeling, it's a state of being able to feel passionate and motivated to something. And I think some of y'all also hinted at this too. There is an underlying layer of whether it's someone else or yourself engaging in self-care to ensure that you, while you're engaging in that empowerment, that you're feeling secure. I think it's one thing to define a word, right? So like, what does empowerment mean to you? I think it's another thing to express when you have felt empowered. And so for the second part of this activity, what I would love people to do is in the chat feature, please answer the following question. When have you felt most empowered in a situation, event, or setting? So think about, so you just defined as individuals who wrote in the chat what empowerment means to you. So when did you embody that? Right before starting a new job? Absolutely. For me, it was when I got the A-OK to schedule my defense day for my dissertation. I was like, oh yeah, here I am. While other people are thinking of when they felt empowered and writing the chat box, I think it's important to note that, you know, again, as I shared earlier, empowerment is a state of being, and it's an action of when you feel empowered and when you feel confident to take on actions or to begin a new journey or to even end journeys, right? When you think of, I always go to the example of relationships in life. So like when you think of a relationship, sometimes you need to feel empowered to end a relationship. Sometimes you need to feel empowered to begin a new relationship. And so when we're looking at the workplace, we are always ending and beginning new opportunities. And, you know, that does stem from a place of courage and a place of sincerity. And so what I want us to do is start thinking about, okay, we have defined what empowerment has meant to us. We have illustrated where we have felt empowered and how can we actually apply this to this session in TPE. And I think what's important to know is that there are a lot of things in life you cannot control, but there's a lot of things in life that you can control. And so naming some of the things that you can control to feel empowered, to create that self-confidence, that sense of safe and security is when I think of interview times, the first thing I tell people, and I know it's a little bit harder depending on the employer, but try to schedule times that your body knows it's best for you. That sounds very meta, and I'm gonna break it down very quick. I know I'm a morning person. I wake up every day at 3 a.m. So by the time it's like 9 a.m., I am like the most wired person in the office when we log into Zoom calls. I know by around 5 o'clock, I'm done with the computer. I wanna go to Orange Theory and I do not wanna see my screen. I'm also the most crankiest around 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So the reason I share that is because our bodies know when we are the most active. Our bodies know when we are the most alert. And as individuals, for us to be empowered or feel confident in spaces, it's understanding our bodies. And so for you, if you know that the best time for you to, and when I mean best time for you, like when you're the most alert, you're the most comfortable, you're not still in that drowsy state of, I just woke up, someone please throw me back to my bed. If you know that's like, for me, around, let's do employer time, so around 9 a.m., then I know for a fact I will be the most alert, the most comfortable around 9 a.m. And that's probably when I should schedule my interviews if possible. And it's not just scheduling your interviews. I think it's also understanding what do you need during this interview process. And so what you'll see in this PowerPoint, I also talk about some things that you need to identify physically, socially, psychologically as well. So when you're thinking about this interview experience, identify one, physically, what do you need? I know I always need either tea or coffee or a glass of water, right? No matter where I am in an interview or in meeting spaces, I know I talk a lot, I get cotton mouth, I need something to drink. The other thing I also need is, y'all probably see this fake plant, this is not real, behind me. I love being around lighting and nature. It helps me feel re-energized. And so I actually move this plant in front of my computer when I'm interviewing or speaking to other people, if I ever need that extra boost. In talking about lighting, I have a ring light here. So I change the setting, the brightness, depending on like what mood I want to embrace. But those are some of the physical things to keep in mind when you're thinking of what you might need. When you think of socially of feeling empowered, think about your lifelines. And when I say lifelines, I think of who are the people you go to when like there's a moment of crisis, right? That might be a guardian, a parent, that might be your best friend, your partner, a classmate, a colleague. And so when you're thinking of what do you need to do to identify things to make you feel empowered socially, think of your lifelines, think of your support systems, because we'll be honest, interviewing takes a lot of energy, right? You have to present yourself in a certain way, and that is just exhausting in itself before everything else. So think about your lifelines, think of your support systems that you need to help you feel empowered. Thirdly, it's psychological and well-being. And so when we think about the 9 to 5, or if you work more than that or less than that, we're sitting right in front of a computer in a chair, not always as comfortable as we want. And so what are you doing psychologically to impact your well-being, right? May that be working out, may that be reflection, may that be walking away from computer. What are you engaging in, and what do you need to define to help your well-being during this state of mind? And so after you're done identifying all those things, just remember 2 last things, right? When we're trying to feel empowered in this interview process is reflect and apply what you learned in your first interview to your next interview. You don't need to write this in the chat, but internally, has there ever been a time when you made a mistake in front of other people? Yes, I feel like once a week, and it's okay, that happens, we are human. But I think it feels different when we are presenting who we are to people we don't know, or even people that do know us, but for a different reason in a different space. And so if you're ever in a space where you feel like you did poorly in an interview, that is okay. What happens, happens. What you should do then is take what you learned in that space and apply it to your next interview. Don't dwell in that space. Before I go into like imposter syndrome, Nick, is there anything you want to add to about feeling empowered and identifying things, setting your stage, and identifying the things you may need physically, socially, and psychologically?
Yeah, I think it's also important to identify, and you hinted at this, but identifying what you're not in control of in your interview space. So you are not in control of, there's a large dumpster, a trash pickup happening outside your window, right? You're not in control of that, right? And so orienting your mind in a way that you just realize that this is something that I'm not in control of, so I'm not going to obsess over it. So if I need to, I will identify it as a thing that is present in the space. If I don't, then I will act like it isn't in the space at all. In the case of a trash truck, right, it's as easy as saying to someone, "Hey, I'm sorry, I apologize. There's a large trash truck outside," right? So stuff like that. You aren't in control of that. Identify it and try to release yourself from it and move on.
Nicely said, Nick. Absolutely. And then I think the last thing, which we've heard either here and there, but it's definitely an underlying foundation of like feeling empowered, is how do we address insecurities and how do we address things like imposter syndrome? And for those who haven't heard of imposter syndrome, it's the idea in which that we see opportunities and are engaged in events, or we are fearful of engaging in opportunity or events because we don't think we're deserving, that for some odd reason we are a fraud and we should not be engaging or seeking out those opportunities. And I saw this article on LinkedIn that talked about the importance of like rewriting the narrative of imposter syndrome. And what it meant by that was like, we need to, while it's okay to acknowledge that, there are moments where we may feel like frauds or that we may not feel comfortable with opportunities, it's important to remember that you are deserving, right? There's a reason why you are put on this earth, and there's a reason why you're where you're at in your life. And so if you're working hard towards something, never doubt yourself, right? Never be in a space of where you're like, oh, well, I don't deserve this because I'm not good enough. Okay, look at the requirements, evaluate yourself, apply, and let them tell you no. And so I think the most important thing I will ever tell people, and I've been saying this since 2021, is what's for you won't pass you, right? So apply for opportunities. And if it's meant for you, you will get it. And Believe it or not, it will happen if it's for you. And if it's not, that is okay. That means there's another opportunity out there for you. But don't let the idea of you being a fraud or you thinking of like, I'm too young for this opportunity, stop you before you apply. Let them tell you no. And if they tell you no, guess what? It's their loss, because that means there's another opportunity that you are meant for. Nick, anything you want to add to that?
Nope, you covered it all. I will also add about imposter syndrome is that if you meet the qualifications, you're qualified, right? It depends on what works best for the institution and you. But if you meet the qualifications, you are qualified. If you are hired, then you are qualified. And I always want to remind people of that, of those facts.
Thank you so much, Nick. So part of feeling empowered, right, in this virtual setting is making sure your documents and your papers and your receipts are in line. And so we're going to take a quick moment to talk about resumes and cover letters and how to make sure that your documents are good to go. So when you go into that space, you're feeling ready before anything begins. So as Nick, me and Nick have been most recently getting questions about resumes, everything from what font to what size, like the letterhead itself, to how many pages. And I did an asterisk here because I think what happens is that we get too caught up in like technicalities, right? Like, yes, what most employers will say is a 2-page resume will suffice, especially for entry or advancing level professionals who do not have a lot of years experience. Absolutely. However, there might be, I'm not going to put everyone in a box. There might be people who have worked multiple jobs, who have multiple experiences, and that a 2-page resume may not be enough for them. That is okay. You know, take a moment to reflect and understand that if your years of experience and what you're applying to requires more than 2 pages, if you believe that is best, I trust your judgment. But whatever you do, make sure it's not 2.5 pages. Make sure it's a full 3 pages. No one wants to read a half page because it just makes it look empty and feel like this could have been shorter or longer. I think the obvious things, of course, when you're looking, and I'll share a sample right after this, making sure your contact information, whatever you're willing to share, is on there. So most often people have their name, some form of contact, whether it be their phone number, their email, their address. And then the one thing as reviewers, I don't know if anyone has ever sat on search committees before or reviewed student staff selection resumes, but like consistency is a thing. And so like when you have size 15 font on 3 lines and then decide to go to size 20, people notice that because letters just got bigger. And so just make sure when you are writing your resume that you're being consistent throughout the whole document. May that be bolding, may that be spacing, dates, etc. Consistency is key here because what will happen is if I'm trying to understand when someone's start and end date is, if it's one on the right and then it ends up somewhere being on the left, that's hard to follow sometimes. So just make sure you're trying your best to make it easier for the reviewer to understand your experience. And then I think many people are aware of this, but when you're including your role information, make sure you're putting the title of your position. So if you were a graduate assistant, if you were a director, you know, who was your employer? And I think this is also important information too, your start date, your end date. If you just leave a date there, I do not know if you're still working for that employer, if you left your employer. So just make sure you always put the start and end date. And then this is very important, a description of what you did and what you accomplished. A resume shouldn't feel like a checklist. And what I mean by that is saying, I've been a director, I've been a graduate assistant, I have been a volunteer, and there's no context to what you did in that space. Resumes, the reason they serve a purpose, and that is to give a glimpse and understanding of like what you've done within a role or within an opportunity. And so if you are just writing your role, it's hard for people to understand what you did in that role, right? And if you cannot articulate what you've done in that role, resumes are oftentimes the first screening process, whether it be algorithms on computers or people reviewing them. If you cannot articulate what you've done, this will be the first screening process people will see and screen people out. So that's something to keep in mind. Nick, anything that you want to add before I show the example of one? No, perfect. So I'm going to stop sharing momentarily. And for if just a random side note, if anyone has questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I know Nick is monitoring the chat as well as I am. And so it looks like no questions has come in. Someone gave me a heads up. Thank you for the heads up. I saw that. But what I'm going to do right now is share my screen, just share you my personal resume, because I think that shows a level of vulnerability and can be an example for folks. So of course, you'll see a black line. I blacked out my information. Not that I don't want people to contact me. You can contact me at the end of the presentation, but normally here would be like your address, your phone number, whatever you want to share. And what you'll see here is kind of what I was talking about in terms of making sure people see consistency, right? So what you'll see between my education header, which is right here, and my student affairs experience header is that they're bolded and they're centered, and there's a pretty gold line under it. Pretty like consistent, right? But then what you'll also see here too is that my roles in terms of my dates are to the right-hand side of my column. And then things are bolded in terms of, we can start with my education, my institution, and my degree, bolded, bolded. When you look more specifically at my role, what you'll see here is I do a similar format for every position, which will have my office, which is the Office of Housing Residence Life, my university, George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and then my role. And it's the same thing after that as well. Now, again, as I shared, resumes will look different. I have a CV, since I'm a doctoral candidate, I have this is my longer detailed resume, and I have a 2-page resume. Share what you feel most comfortable sharing, but keep those fundamental things in mind about consistency, about dates and descriptions, because if you are not doing the basics, it's hard for people to understand what is happening in the space, right? So that's just one example of a resume. There we go. Okay, perfect. And let me just pull up the chat, see if any questions have shown up. No questions so far, but feel empowered to write questions in the chat. I was working with someone and they said, Christian Sparrow, I just don't get what you write as bullet points. And for a minute, I was like, what do you mean you don't know what to write? You're in the role. But then I realized that the person was having issues, like they were a visual learner, like visually understanding what to write. I'm not saying this is the best method out there. People just copy and paste the bullet points. People do whatever's the best thing for them. But for y'all, I'm going to share my tip of what I've done with my resume that I think helps employers understand, at least from my background, what I do in roles. So it's I was horrible at math, but I was really good at statistics and simple equations. So here what you see is verb plus action plus for what or for whom equals impact, right? So as you know, when you start your resume in your line, your lines of your bullet points that describe what you're doing, it oftentimes starts with a verb, may that be past tense or present tense. That is universal all across the board. And then oftentimes your verb has to associate with something that you've done. So using the first bullet point as an example, I planned and coordinated. Okay, I planned and coordinated what? I planned and coordinated the department new hire onboarding and training manual. Okay, that makes sense. Oftentimes, what helps sentences feel completed is people know what was your action for, like who was it for what reason. So you'll see in green, I kind of highlighted, okay, who was this for? So the verb again is planning coordinated. My action was the department new hire onboarding manual or training and manual. And who was that for? For new hires, duh. And then what's the overall impact? Oftentimes what happens is companies like Google love this, where you're able to show a statistic, you're able to show an impact of what you've done, because not only does it show that you've done the role, but there was some sort of impact. May that be numerically, statistically, or just in terms of an effect. So for me, the impact for creating this onboarding training manual was to ensure successful employee launch experience. So we had to do an onboarding experience, and we needed to make sure our employees felt successful in this experience. And so that's just a quick tip of what I've told people is think about your verb action for what or for whom. And sometimes we know our job so well that when we write a sentence, we think everyone can understand it. But in reality is if remove yourself from the situation. If a reviewer had to read your resume, would they fully understand what you did in that space? And if the question is yes, awesome, you did what you had to do. If the answer is no, you have to rework and rewrite that sentence.
Can I add to that? Because there's
Yeah.
a important piece that you mentioned that I really wanted to stress. Think about your resume in terms of articulating what you were doing in your role. Think about how you would have to explain that to a very, very general audience, right? And when you do, if anyone has ever had any sort of media training, right? For example, and what they tell people, if you want to articulate complex thoughts, you need to be thinking about your audience on the receiving end as being somewhere either between like a grade schooler to a teenager. And so thinking about how do you make the pieces of your role accessible to those who are completely unfamiliar with your role. So in many cases, most institutions are using their HR department as a screening tool for resumes. So these are folks who have a general understanding of what a department does, but they may not be really specific, right? So they may not know the specific lingo that we use in res life, so to say, right? They may not know the specific lingo of RAs and blah, 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 and swag and RA training. They may not know that lingo. So you need to think about how do I make my position accessible to those who have no knowledge of what we do in our department. And so usually you're thinking about how do I tease this out in a way that someone who is not right appear in my department of that level or of that magnitude. How do I tease it out? I always like to think, can I explain what I do to someone who does not work in higher ed? If I cannot do that, then I am not doing a good enough job at making the knowledge of what I'm doing in my role accessible. And I'm not doing a good job of teasing out my elevator pitches or my resume bullet points if I cannot help someone who does not work in our industry understand what I do.
Well said, Nick. Well said. We had a few questions come in, so let me answer them real quickly. Someone sent to me, if I have a 1.5 page resume, should I extend it to 2 pages? Absolutely. The model is go full pages, don't go half pages, because what happens is it looks empty. It looks like it either wasn't finished or that there could have been more to elaborate. So when you're looking at maybe at your roles in terms of your experience, maybe there are a few more bullet points you can add, or think about some of the categories that are missing that you could include. One thing that comes to my mind is skills. And in skills, adding some of your proficiencies, may that be languages, may that be platforms. Just don't do half pages, do full pages, because it makes it look more full at the end of the day. A second question also came in that is the contact email address completely necessary? So when it comes to the job search process, so what I will say is that when you're applying, where may it be like through LinkedIn, it may be through the TPE portal, Hire Jobs, you name it, the application portal will tell you what is required, right? Just like it's like required first name, last name. If your email address is required, it will tell you it's required. Now, if you don't want to put your email address on your resume, that is okay, but just make sure that your application then does have a form of how an employer can contact you, especially if you're applying through third-party vendors. So I at least know with our platform and on most direct higher ed institutions, it does ask you for your email, so you don't need to necessarily put it on your resume, but that's just something to consider and to keep in mind. And then the other question that just came in is, what is your opinion about having references on a resume? So what I would say is, if someone wants resumes or references, they will have that as a section. So think about it like this. If you are putting your references on your resume, you are actually taking away space that you could be going more elaborate about your skill set. So if someone is asking for your references, that will be for a separate document, or you will manually include that. I wouldn't suggest putting that on your resume, because if they really need it, they will ask for that information either in the application portal or as a separate document. So just something to keep in mind. You are very welcome. So again, we're in this journey of empowerment. So we got to make sure all our documents are in alignment. So the last thing that we're going to talk about our documents is our cover letter. And this is something that I think most people, similar to resumes, think like, what is the best resume? What is the structure? And there isn't the best structure, because honestly, resumes are a form, Christians, we're getting a little poetic here, a form of storytelling of how do you showcase who you are, but then also speak to your value to the employer. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. That's not one single template, but I will show you an example. Oops, getting too excited. So keep it at a page, but not required, right? You can go 2 pages, but just make sure you're covering enough information for the employer to understand what you're doing in that space. It should have your information somewhere, may that be in your signature, may that be on the header, where someone knows that this is the right cover letter to this file. Again, this goes back to size. It doesn't need to be 12 times New Roman font and size, but like make sure it's consistent. Don't do like Arial 20 just because you are running out of things to say and need a whole page to be covered, right? People notice that we are no details. So keep it consistent and make sure it's like 0.12 font. But if you gotta use 11, go for 11. In the key information, I thought about this in buckets for everyone in this space. And there's really 3 buckets. One is like who you are as a professional, right? What's that persona you want to carry? 2, when you think of the employer, what is the employer seeking? And what is your experience in that, right? So resumes will have specific duties. They're looking for specific skill sets. Okay, acknowledge that, but then also what is your experience within that? And then what can you offer? So you're already sharing who you are as a professional. What is your persona? What's your ethos? What you're bringing to the team? You're addressing what the company or institution is looking for and how your experience in that. But then what can you offer that other candidates may not offer like you can? And so what I'm going to do here, and Nick, as I'm getting ready to share the cover letter, any tips, tricks, advice for cover letters in this space?
Yeah, so I would also add that what are you unable to articulate in your resume? That is what I've always known cover letters to be for the most part. So is there a theme that you can't, obviously tie together in your resume? Are you switching functional areas, or are you switching careers? You can't really convey. This is always the space that I think is for that. So we had an interesting, we get some interesting questions from folks who have left higher ed and are coming back, or folks who are on a different side of the coin than student affairs, so to say. They're in academic affairs, or they're a faculty member, and they're trying to figure out, well, how do I edit my resume in a certain way to make sure it's attractive? And some of that you just can't do with the resume. Some of that you need to be able to lean into your cover letter to help you convey those thoughts. And so I've always used the cover letter in place of where I can't highlight something on a resume, or I can't connect a specific theme, or there's something that I know will be desired from my resume, right? If there's a gap of 2 years and I'm looking for a space to help folks understand why there is a gap, that's the cover letter's responsibility.
Nicely stated, Nick. Nicely stated. Yeah, I like that. The cover letter, it serves as a opportunity to express what you couldn't express in your resume. And so I'm just showing one example. There are several out there, even if you Google examples, but don't Google the bad examples, Google the good ones. So what you see here, this is how I broke mine up into those 3 buckets that I kind of explained. So here, of course, I have my contact information, and then the employer's contact information. And then here I kind of go into those 3 buckets. So the first one is like kind of setting the stage and explaining like who I am as a professional. And for those who are like skimming and reading, like I speak about like I have a passion for coaching and for professional development. And this is how it's shown up, whether it be me on committees or my dissertation research on the internship experience. And then my second paragraph focuses specifically on, I specifically chose things that they explain in their job description. So for this employer, they're looking for someone for professional development to work on DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're looking for someone to manage mentorship programs, cohorts, you name it. So I made sure that in this paragraph, I took the things that I could speak to, the things that I said I had experience in, and leveraged that in the second paragraph. And then in the third paragraph was my wrap up, in which, I tell them how they can contact me, but also most importantly, what I can offer, what I can deliver to them that I wasn't able to express in my resume and what I did not talk about in my first two paragraphs. This was my closing, my invitation to a dinner or to an interview, hopefully, to learn more about what I could offer to them. So that's just one example, one format. There are several out there, but this is one way that could help people in this space.
And something that I'm picking up from just like quickly scanning this document that Christian shared is that your cover letter is also an opportunity to highlight an experience that you couldn't go into detail to on your resume. So for example, when you are at the point you're filling out your resume for 2 pages, I know on my resume personally, I don't have the opportunity to go into detail about my committee work, for example, right? So currently in my role, I serve on the Patriot League Anti-Racism Commission and the Institutional Policies Working Groups. I have no way on my resume of explaining exactly what that is, right? I know people will see the word anti-racism and make assumptions, but I don't have a way to really explain that section of my resume. And so in my particular case, as I was making a move out of Res Life or retiring from Res Life, as I jokingly say, I was looking to move into DEI and multicultural affairs. And so while I had pieces of my current role that enabled me to do that, I also had to lean on the work I was doing on committees, but I didn't exactly have space to really break down the committees on my resume. So I talked about it in the cover letters. I talked about the specific work that I did with specific committees in that section on the cover letter to help tease out my experience a little bit more, help people understand why I felt I was capable of doing specific roles. And so this is another use of your cover letter.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick. And so we spent time defining what empowerment was for us. We talked about how we felt empowered. We talked about one of the ways how to psychologically, physically, spiritually be prepared to set our stage. We talked about some of the documents that can help us feel empowered when we walk into spaces. Now we're going to talk about, okay, we did all the prep work. What happens when we're in the space, Christian and Nick? SOS, help me ASAP. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And this part, the interview experience in itself, for me is the most part, like the most fun part. I also know it's also the most terrifying. And so we're going to talk about setting your stage, right? Someone wrote this in the comments earlier, but when they were defining empowerment, it was when they talked about when they felt empowered was starting a new job. And that's almost setting a new chapter. And this is exactly it, right? You are meeting with an employer. And so you need to set your stage. While it may be intimidating that you don't know what's going to happen next after your interview, don't let that intimidate you. Know that you have an opportunity and a chance to let people know who you are as a professional. And so the first thing is, of course, do your homework, right? So when you're applying for institutions, or even if they're reaching out to you saying, hey, we would love to interview, understand who they are as an institution. Are they public? Are they private? Are they considered a large institution? Are they considered a small institution? Are they religious? Are they not religious? Are they research one? Are they not research one? All those details matter because it helps you have a better understanding of that landscape, but also good key talking points in your interview, right? I think it's also important to understand while a lot of the employers that are reaching out to, they are assigned a department, right? So housing residence life might be at George Mason University, but that's still a housing residence life department at Mason. And so understand that department. What are some of the initiatives they're doing? What are the things they're promoting? What does their website speak about them? What is their ethos? What is their philosophy? What are the things that they're presenting themselves as? Because while every department may have a similar job, coordinator for housing residence life, every department operates differently. Every department has different philosophies. And so while you can understand, the more you understand that department's philosophy, approaches, and values, the better off you are because you can bring that to the interview. If an employer cares about diversity, equity, inclusion, as they all should, but if one of them really cares about it, you can make sure you speak about that and make note of that in your interview. And lastly is understand your role. Hopefully, if you're applying for jobs, it's because you see yourself in the role, because it gives you energy and excitement. I also will acknowledge that there are times where we're just applying for jobs for transition, right? We need to get out of our current roles, but also there are life situations happening. Whatever you do and for whatever your why is, just make sure you're understanding that role and what is the responsibilities of that role, because they will ask you questions in relation to that role. It's always important when you're setting your stage to think about who you are as a person. I know this is also sounding very philosophical, very meta, but as I shared in my cover letter, the one thing I talked about was I care about helping people in transitions. This is a great example of it. I love helping people through chapters in their lives and helping them find employment. And so who are you as a professional, or who are you as a person? Think about that question, because I'm sure that's gonna be one of their questions. Tell us about yourself. Who are you and why you're applying for this job? What has really helped me, and I think is advice that most coaches and most individuals have shared out, is when you're going through the job in itself, I do a highlight system. This is very type A. This is the arranger in me. I fully acknowledge it. But if you are still trying to understand what that job does, make sure that you can do a highlight system. It can help you. It can help you in the interview, because it can kind of tell you what you should be talking about, what you should probably not talk about as much, and then what are some things that that are transferable. So, for example, highlight things in green that you know you have done. If you've done programming, if you've done student staff recruitment, if you've done student support and advocacy work, awesome, highlight that green. Highlight red or like pink, like the things you know you absolutely have not done or could not even pitch that you've done, because that gives you an indication of like, okay, I can't really speak to this to the best of my ability. And then maybe highlight in yellow the things that are transferable, the things that can pass. You may be applying for a housing job if you've never done housing student staff selection recruitment, but maybe you've been working in Greek life and you've done some sort of selection recruitment for that. Is it exactly the same? No. Is it transferable and similar? Absolutely. So go through your job description, make sure you have an understanding of what you can say you've done, what you haven't done, and what you can show us what's transferable. One thing I always like to tell people is, what do you want them to remember and what impression you want to leave? And that doesn't mean like you need to think of a tagline right now and make sure you say it in every interview. But what it means is like when you walk away from a space, how do you want people to remember you? For me, I want people to remember that I'm a positive energy, that I care about supporting people, and that most importantly, I know that no matter what happens in life, I will always strive for greatness and help people get to greatness as well. And they don't hear me say that. They understand that through my interview and the things I mentioned throughout my conversations. Invite them to the stage, right? As much as they're interviewing you, this is a co-experience. Interview them. Do not go to an interview space without questions. Please do not do that. Go into an interview space with questions. While you're doing your homework and understanding the department and the institution, see what's questionable. And when I mean questionable, see things like you don't understand or that you need clarity on, right? May that be the way they focus on professional development for their employees. How would someone be onboarded into this role? What is one goal that they have for themselves with this year or in the next 5 years? Think about the questions you want to ask them, because when you have people talk about themselves, they feel included, right? Question, don't need to write this in chat, but I'm sure people felt included when I opened up the session asking about what does empowerment mean to you and where was the time that you felt empowered, right? You felt like you were invited to this discussion. And make sure you're inviting people to your interview because you're also interviewing them. I'll talk about this in the next slide, but it's nice to send a thank you note. It's not required, and most people don't even reply, but it's a nice gesture to say thank you so much for taking your time, because people did take their time to understand you and vice versa. So just keep that in mind. It's not a requirement. People at least shouldn't be weighing you if you send a thank you note or not. It's just a good gesture and good, I think, form to say thank you for taking your time. Nick, anything that you would add to this slide?
Absolutely. Under the do your homework section, people always look at understanding the institution, department, and the role as reading the job description and the posting and looking at the institution's website and demographics and the department's website. I'm going to add a layer there. Find their social medias for the department, for the institution, etc. Find out what the students are saying about these places via social media. Find the good, find the bad, because this can also help you identify some concerns in or an area in which the department may want to improve, and you can actually have the ability to speak specifically to that area. It will be a welcomed surprise, or the glad surprise, so to speak, for an employer to hear you speak toward an issue that they didn't even think that you knew that they had, and you found out that issue through social media. It's something that greatly has helped me in my searches, is seeing what the students were saying and being able to walk into that space knowing that this is an area that a department wanted to improve on, and having that knowledge and being able to speak directly to that and show them how I would do a good job of meeting that need within the department. And so find the social medias too, the Instagram, the Twitters, the Reddit. Reddit is a much bigger thing than I realized. So if you can find their Reddit, all of those different things, that's really helpful. Um, be thinking about, in terms of who are you, think about how best do you want to communicate the values that are important to you. How best do you want to communicate that that's important to the department and you. Find things that the department values that are also big values to yourself as well. So for my current role, our biggest value was meaningful and creative shared experiences, and that if we sustain and multiply those experiences throughout a lifetime, we can remove any barrier. So that was important to me and important to the department. So I spent a lot of time in my interview speaking directly to how I could help students have those experiences and enrich their college experience. That was simple homework, but it was also saying that this is a value that is a priority to me as well. And so I feel confident at speaking about that at length as well. And I want to echo lastly Christian's sentiment about inviting them to the stage. This is an interview for them, but it's also an interview for you. So you are also simultaneously, you also have a lot of power in this situation as well to decide that this place just may not be for me. And adding that simple reminder is that making sure you stand out in whatever way standing out looks for you. I want to be honest and transparent with you all. You are not going to be the only qualified candidate in a candidate pool, right? You are not going to be the only top candidate in the candidate pool. There will be multiple people in that pool that will be qualified for the role. It's about finding the best, the candidate that fits the needs the most. And sometimes other candidates may have other specific skills, but everybody, for the most part, will walk into that pool and be qualified. So I just want you to keep that in mind as you think about ways that you ensure that you're unique or you communicate your values correctly. To say on the flip side that knowing that there will be a lot of qualified candidates, it may not be personal to you at all as to why you didn't get that job, right? Again, they're qualified candidates. I'll see you later, Jay. Thank you for being with us. But that may be something for you to consider as well.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you reminding folks that like there are a lot of great candidates. So sometimes it's very hard for employers to find the ideal candidate because sometimes a pool is oversaturated depending on the hiring season. And so just keep that in mind as well as Nick shared. I saw a question that just came in. I'm going to do this last slide and then read it. So don't worry, I gotcha. After the interview, so I talked about this a little bit, sending a thank you. It's not required, but again, it's just good form to just say, thank you so much for listening to this conversation, for this interview process. What I love doing, because it shows a level of like, I don't want to say concentration or listening, but when someone says something to you in an interview space, like, oh, this has been my experience, write it down, make note of it. However, you need to remember that person says X, Y, and Z to however they answer your question, because what I have done, which I think shows some level of commitment or a level of engagement, is when I send my thank yous, I also make note of what they said. So thank you, Nick, so much for interviewing me, and thank you for answering the question that I asked about this. I found it very interesting, or very happy that X, Y, and Z. And Nick will reply back most times and not saying, thank you so much for being here in the space, and go extra mile and talk a little bit more. Again, not required. Employers don't need to reply back to a thank you, but do all that you can to put your best foot forward. Nick had a session last week about professional branding, from social media to LinkedIn to ePortfolios. And we also talked about this here in the space. Like, if there's any additional things that you want to send to them, send them in your thank you. I talked about ePortfolios last week as well. And I think there's only so much you can do in 30 minutes, and there's only so much that a resume and cover letter can speak to. So if there's additional things that you would like to send in your thank you, include it. If they'll choose to read it and they'll choose not to read it, that's all that they can do. But at least you did everything in your power to feel empowered in that space. And then lastly, when it comes to after the interview, just be open to any option, right? Be open to the offers, be open to the second round interviews, be open to even rejection. And rejection is something that we do not talk about often in the job search process, but it is real, it happens, and it sucks, but it doesn't always have to be negative, right? Sometimes things don't work out for the betterment of who we are. There might be things happening at an institution that we didn't even know, that we did not even want to touch with a 10-foot pole, and thankfully we got a rejection, right? But all jokes aside, just recognizing that, there are different pathways that can happen in this job search process, and be willing and prepared to embrace them all, no matter what road that may take you. Nick, as I review the questions, anything that you want to add?
So this would originally, if we were having TP in person, this would be the moment where Dr. Fox would love it if I say, do not write a paper thank you cards. And I allude to this joke because TP is always a popular thing with the mailboxes. But on our end, it was a tough task trying to make sure that we got all of the thank you notes in mailboxes in times. But also some employers would leave before you get the opportunity to share thank you note. And so email is the way to go. There are also wonderful sort of greeting card applications and services that you can use in different little nuances, where you can send recorded messages, etc. So those are always the way to go. But I echo mailboxes, rest in peace. Thank you, Dr. Fox. But I echo Christian's sentiment, right? Keying in on something that was discussed during the interview or the conversation, as well as being really intentional. Is there anything else that you wish you would have said you didn't get a chance to say? A thank you card or email is a great place to say that. But it's also, and I think this is important too. Sometimes we're not thinking about this. Yes, I understand we all need jobs and we need the income, but this is also a continuation of building your network within higher education. All right. So myself as a professional, I've been on many sides of the TPE coin, but when I was an employer, there are still a lot of candidates that were in the candidate pool that I interviewed that I didn't get the chance to maybe hire for our team, but I still do keep in contact with as they advance through their career, because they still, I'm doing candidate coaching even when I don't have to, but they want to know more about the field. They want to stay connected. If they believe that your institution was dynamite, your department was dynamite, or they believe in you as a dynamite professional, they want to remain connected. And so, look at thank you notes, and this is the way that I did not, but look at them as a continuation of fellowshipping within the field as well.
Yes, because, in life, and this could just be my dissertation brain talking, like, we have all different forms of capital, right? And like, when we think of social relations and our networks, sometimes it's not what we know, it's who we know that can open a door. So just, as Nick said, send those thank yous, because that can open doors. May that be mentorship opportunities, friendships, or even future opportunities. I know we only have 3 minutes left. There was one question that came in that I think is a good one. They're all good ones that came in. That was, when it comes to Res Life positions, is it appropriate to ask how many positions are open? So what I would say is, and Nick, maybe Nick, you have you can chime into this too if you have a different opinion. But I feel like whenever an employer has had multiple positions, they've been pretty transparent, right? At least for me, we had to hire 12 new community directors, and we were very transparent. We're hiring multiple community directors. I don't think there's a stigma against asking, oh, is there one or multiple positions for this position? Just be mindful of how you question it. Just be mindful of that. But again, I think if an employer is hiring for multiple positions, they will tell you from the get-go. At least from my experience, they have.
I echo Dr. Fox's statement. Don't ask if you can easily find the information. So don't ask that question if it's already on the job description or the job board where you, because it's also going to look like you're not paying attention as well. And so you don't want to come off like that. At TPE, typically institutions are sharing with us and letting us know through that platform that will let you all know that there are multiple positions as well. So making sure you do that, and I think you should be fine.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Fox. So as we're wrapping up, because we have 1 minute left, as you're thinking about your onboarding experience, and when we're thinking of onboarding, it does not mean you have a job confirmed. I think it oftentimes always associates to like your first 90 days and, you know, I had to have a job in place, but think about preparing for that experience too. Nick and I are going to have what we're calling our Backpack Institute that focuses specifically on feeling prepared for your first 90 days. And it's going to be a cohort experience. So more information to come. You'll get this in your newsletter, but we hope that if you like our energy in this space, you're definitely going to like that experience too. And we'll open it up for questions. I know people have typed in your questions and we've answered all of them to this point. But are there any last minute questions that someone wants to ask that comes to mind that they're like, I need to ask right now before the session ends? Okay, with no questions asked, what I will say is thank you everyone for being in the space. Thank you for engaging in a full hour of content. This was a lot. And so I know if you're either walking out here very excited or overwhelmed. We will send a video in our next newsletter or the one after this with the YouTube of this video. But if you need any resources or any support at all, please reach out to us. Nick and I are always here to support, whether it be looking at a resume or just giving one-on-one consultation or advice. So at least for me, thank you for being here in this space, and I wish you the best of luck in this new chapter and journey.